Yes. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this third try live Q&A with me and Tricia. We are really hoping the sound is better. We're going to hold on a few seconds to let you join because, of course, there's no link to join. As you can see, I've changed location because we worked out it was me, not Tricia. Playing Tricia, but it was all my fault. Well, fingers crossed.
I think it was a perfect storm. But yes. If you have found us, please like it because then that will help others find us as well.
Yes. I think we still have some issues. I will have to go to a different room, but hopefully be much better than before. And hello, Beth.
Yay.
Yes. Welcome, everybody. So, I'm going to just start again. So, yes, this is a special Tricky Thursday. Normally, Tricia and I cover a pattern cutting topic, give you all our expertise, and also have a bit of fun in the chat about topic we love. But there's a special live Q&A today because one thing we love is chatting to you. And quite often we run out of time because we keep it to an hour. So today we have a whole... Yes. Very demanding old cat, aren't you? We're going to have a whole session just answering all your questions, anything pattern cutting related. We already had a few questions, but while we answer these, do please feel to put them on the chat and then we will answer them as they come up. And before we get started, Tricia, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I know we have a lot of friends here, but if you are new to us in this little chat, I can't remember if you just mentioned it or if you mentioned it before we got cut off, but we do a live Tricky Thursday, not always Q&A, like Charlotta mentioned. We usually have a topic that we'll discuss about pattern making or sewing or fabric. But we do a live and we go back and forth between Charlotta and I's YouTube channels. So this month we're on Charlotta's channel, so next month we'll be on my channel. So please tune in for that. It's usually towards the end of the month, either the last week or this is the second to last week. But my name is Tricia. I'm the owner of Creative Costume Academy. I have 20 plus years experience making costumes. That's where a lot of my pattern cutting knowledge comes from. And I am an online pattern making teacher. So I have a couple of different memberships where you can learn from me. And in addition to that, I share lots of my tips and tricks here on YouTube and love to interact and help you know that you can learn it too. It's not unattainable. So that's kind of my little spiel.
And I will put all of Tricia's link in the description afterwards because it's a new one. And if you're coming from Tricia's side, I'm Charlotta from School of Pattern Cutting. I come from a fashion background, but my real passion is pattern cutting and also vintage influences. And thank you very much, Beth, for the compliment. This is actually the top we're going to draft in the membership tomorrow, which is a royal, it's actually contemporary, but it has that vintage feel and it's got really nice, very royal, great. But my passion, like Tricia, is pattern cutting and making it accessible to all of you. And we share quite a few members, so there's always really nice.
Yes.
It's a really inclusive, lovely community we have. And
so if you're here and you have a question, please don't be shy. Put them into the chat. This episode is dedicated to you and hanging out with you and answering your questions. We do have some, but that's why we like going live, is so that we can interact with you guys. And we know that it was a bit touch and go with technology, as it always is that way. So we're making it work. But if you're out there, let us know.
Yeah. And shall we start with the questions we already had?
Sure. Yeah.
Yes. So the first question was actually, I might start with the one about darts, and I've now got all the stuff I prepared upstairs. So, yes, I get it upstairs in a second. I let you talk. The first question we had, and it's a question I got asked last week, and then I had lots of time, is why we have blocks with different dart positions. And while Tricia shows you hers, I'm going to run downstairs and get mine.
Sure. So, and what she was saying, like what she's talking about there is, I guess people have asked her frequently, why do you have a block this is my standard block that I usually have you start with when you start learning pattern making. For me, sometimes you will see them where they'll have 2 darts, not usually there, but 2 darts, the 2 dart bodice block. Or sometimes you'll have a block that has a dart in a different position. And I mean, as long as the base of the pattern fits your body or whoever you're making patterns for, that's the important thing. And once you start learning pattern making and pattern cutting, you're going to learn that you can move this dart anywhere and it still will fit the same. So it just depends on your personal preference. It depends on the style in which you're going to make, which block you might choose to start with, because that might be closer to the desired outcome that you're looking for. So it would take less steps to get to that design that you're looking for. The reason that I start with mine just being 1 dart is because typically people and students who start with me, you don't know about dart manipulation, which is the first principle. So instead of starting with 2 darts and then teaching you with 2 darts and having to move that around, I figure it's easier if we just start with 1 dart. We learn how we can turn that 1 dart into 2 darts, into multiple darts, and kind of start at the beginning instead of starting with multiple different ranges. But that's my personal preference and how I like to teach. But I know that Charlotta usually uses, I think you usually start with a 2 dart bodice, but you also...
Yeah, so mine looks like this.
Yeah.
And when the question I get asked, and some of you have done my block drafting course, is my block drafting course has the bust dart up here. And that's how I think 90% of drafting courses work. Japanese, I think, do it in the side seam. But the reason I went turn it is for sort of similar reasons to Tricia, is because most of my designs take place here. So if I had my dart up here, I would always have to rotate it first to get it out of the way. And I think in general, in fashion, you have a dart at the side seam. But I've noticed in tailoring quite often, they start with a central shoulder bust dart. And I think, again, that's because most of the time their sort of styles have some vertical fitting line going on.
Right. The other thing is too, I've found that like having multiple darts, having a 2 dart bodice as a block works especially well if you have a larger bust.
Yeah.
So because this is a pretty chunky dart, you know, it does create the cupping, and that's the whole point of a dart, is to create that cup to go over our bust mound. So if you have a larger than average bust mound, and average, whatever that means, but if you have a bigger mound to cover, this dart could get quite large to fit your bust. So that's where you might want to have your standard block be a 2 dart bodice, or something with a seam, you know, and that would be another reason why you would want to have a block that had different dart positions.
Yeah, yes, I totally agree. And one last thing, one thing I learned on my pattern cutting degree is to never have a single dart like you have to all your shaping as a final seam. So do you agree with that? I think it's a really good working block, but you then do some designing.
Yeah, I would say
quite chunky for most of us.
It could, yeah, like to have a lot going into one area. And then in my courses and in some of my trainings, I talk about how to narrow this a bit if it does end up being quite wild on you. But yeah, it's I mean, that's the thing is turning this into a seam, which is technically turning it into 2 darts again, is going to give you better fitting options, and allow it to cup the body more. Yeah. But I just start with this because I'm like, let's start. You don't know what to do with it. You don't know what the dart is. Like, let's start at the very beginning. So I've chosen to do that. But
makes complete sense.
The number one thing that you'll always hear, one of my favorite catchphrases that my students all know is, you're the boss, especially when you're making your own patterns. So you do what works for you and your body. And the ultimate thing with slopers and blocks is that the reason that you have a sloper, the reason that you have a block, is to give yourself a jumping off point to making a new design. So if you always want to make princess seam dresses, then you want to have a princess seam bodice block or dress block. If you always, want your darts to be at your side, then you're going to want your dart position to always be at your side. So it's kind of thinking about what you would probably use your sloper or your block for in most of the time in the majority of your designs. If you're always making button-down shirts, you can have a button-down shirt sloper or block. If you're always making pants, then make sure you have a pant sloper or a pant block. I mean, it really kind of depends on, it's a template to start from. So anything that you're making consistently, that's what you want to have a block for and a sloper for.
Yes, no, that's so true. And actually this sort of leads on to two other questions we had.
Yeah.
Shall I answer the one about the adaptive pattern cutting first, because I think that's really interesting?
Yeah, that was Nina's question that we got from both. So Nina had asked if you're making or designing adaptive clothing, when you find yourself stuck, when making this pattern, what do you do, or where do you start? Is there any books or resources that we would recommend? It's a tricky question because, we kind of need a little bit more information as to what kind of adaptive clothing you're making for what need. I have a little bit of experience with this because in costuming, in my background, I'm asked to make all kinds of random weird things that don't really exist in everyday life, and you have to figure out how to make it work and make it look maybe aesthetically different than how it functions. So that would be like, if I'm doing a period or a historical show where we have historical garments that look a certain way. Oh no, did we lose Charlotte?
No, I'm here. I'm just going to switch over. Hold a second.
Okay.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, zippers were invented. So you can't, if you go so far back, you don't want to have zippers showing, and things like that. So we do run into that in the costume world where, you want it to look historical, but they might have a quick change where they have to get out of that garment very quickly. And so we have to kind of change how it's built and adapt it for that need. So it is for a different need, but and my biggest advice to when you're feeling stuck is to just kind of start playing, like maybe try to do a half scale version of what you're trying to achieve, just to kind of wrap your mind around how the pieces will go together and is it going to give you the end result that you're looking for, and do mock-ups, and I know that's not always fun, but at least if you're doing it in a half scale, mock-ups might help you to think, well, that part worked, but that didn't work. And sometimes you just can't figure it out. You can't see it until you are actually in it and doing it and trying it. Even doing it as a flat pattern or draping even, until you get to actually sewing the pieces together, sometimes that's when things start to click. So if you're feeling stuck when you're trying, it's great. It's actually the perfect pattern making thing, because that's what pattern making is you're trying to figure it out. So you're trying to figure out this puzzle. Was there anything that you wanted to add? And then I'll talk about that resource that I thought about. Oh, I can't hear you. Can you guys hear Charlotta? Can't hear you. Am I the only one? How about now? Nope. Oh no. Okay. She's figuring out, but while she's doing that, I'll share this other resource. You can't, okay, you just can't hear Charlotta, but you guys can hear me, right? Right, okay, so she's working on it. She's gonna try some things. So so we were trying to think of books and resources, was something else that Nina had asked about. And I'm not sure about any books that come to mind, but I will share with you, there is a,
I wanted to share the new link on Instagram, so I had to go on my computer and thought you had to, anyway, I apologize.
It's okay. Okay. So the link that she's talking about. So there's an account on Instagram. They're actually friends of mine, Lynn and Alex. They have an account and a business called Sewn Adaptive. So I know that in Nina's case, she's wanting to create patterns. I create a pattern line for this, but they would be an excellent resource. They're very giving. They run a nonprofit business where they make adaptations to clothing, and they make adaptive clothing for people with disabilities. So that's one place I would check out, and they're very friendly. They're lovely people. So if you reach out to them, maybe it's something that you guys can that they would have more information about where to find.
Yes, because both Tricia and I were saying we don't really know of any resources.
Yeah.
Books, because I think it's one of the things, to a certain degree, you can use your pattern cutting and fitting skills, because the same, because all our bodies are different.
Right.
It's just there's certain, even blocks are fitted to an average measurement, but then at the trialing stage you might just have to do a few more adaptations. But once you got the block, in a way, if you're drafting for yourself or for a family member or friends, it's actually much more straightforward, because there's a few fashion companies who are in that market, but again, as Tricia said, there's lots of different needs, so they're always really, it's tricky when you're trying to run a business and you have to produce 100, but if you're making one of clothes, you actually are at the perfect place to adapt each pattern. So
hopefully that helps Nina in what she's trying to work on right now, which sounds very interesting.
Yes.
So there is a question that came in the chat, but we did have one more from Nina.
Yeah, so if the
other one, you got your prep, those patterns that you prepped.
I've started the new question, and then I had two more questions, both from one of my members, and one was really good because earlier Tricia said pattern cutting is all about breaking the rules. And this question was,
we're all rebels here.
Yeah. It was, she's basically wanting to draft a strappy dress for herself, but at the same time she now has and it's Anka who asked me this question, next one. She wants to do a strappy dress, and she wants to basically keep all the shaping from her shoulder dart, but of course your shoulder dart and your waist dart at the back don't join. So she's like, I've learned all about cut and slash and dart manipulation, but I got in a real tiff because they don't meet. So what do? I can't follow the rules I've learned, and which work really well at the front. So what you basically do is, because your basic bodice at the back has quite a lot of ease going down, so if you do a strappy dress, you can literally extend your shoulder dart down to the waist dart, and quite often it ends up basically looking something like that. So if that's your back, this is your line for your dress, and then you actually just end up creating a shaping area like that, and then all you do is you just pinch it out, and because it goes all the way down,
you can even join those two and not have to have a seam or a dart in there.
Yes.
So that's a form of contouring.
Yeah, so you basically just add extra contouring. So you start with your dart manipulation, but then you just fit it a bit tighter. But it's I always find it quite interesting, because that's the question I would have asked when I started pattern cutting, because you learned these amazing rules, and then suddenly you move to a different area to your body and it doesn't apply anymore. And it's sort of, I think, because we now know we're rebels, but if you're starting out, you actually think this has worked really well, I don't want to break it. So I thought it was a really good question, because it's sort of dilemma I had quite often when I started out, and then you waste like half an hour doubting yourself because you're trying to force the rule there
to work. Right.
Yeah,
true. That's true.
And the last question from Anka as well, which was, again, I think it's she's just drafted her bodice block, and it's all there, but she says on commercial patterns she always has a sway back. And she said, and I always have to change it, and dresses don't fit if I buy them. So she said, on my bodice block, can I amend it? And the great thing is, Anka, it's a great thing about pattern cutting, because it's actually suddenly really easy. All that real pain when you're in shops. Or
once the garment's already made, it's harder to do. Yeah.
So I've just drawn around how I would do it. I've just drawn out my sorry.
No,
It's mirror imaging so hard. My front and my back, and you can see how I've done two different ones where it's just like down and up, and you literally just lay your front and back borders together with the side seams touching, and you just redraw at waist. So you can just mark it out on your trowel, and then with a change you do once, and then you have the block which fits and serves your purpose. So that's a great thing about learning.
Yeah, so it's basically a sway back adjustment is really, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of calling out these adjustments because I feel like it has a negative connotation to your body, but basically it's that your back length from your neck to your waist is shorter than a lot of things that you'll find in the shops or in anywhere. So that's what Charlotta was saying, is that if you're doing it to a bodice block that has a seam at the waist, it's a matter of taking it from where it's at the front and then coming up to meet so that length is shorter in the back, because you don't need that room there because you're the way that you stand and the way that your back is.
And it's nothing wrong with our bodies. It's just an industry which, you know, it works a certain time, and and so we do pattern cutting because it works for us, isn't it?
And then once you know how to, so that would be for a bodice, and then it's a little bit different if you're using a torso sloper, or if you're not sure what that is, that would be a sloper or a block that starts from your top and goes all the way down to your hip. So there is no waist seam, but there's usually darts that shape in there, and then there is a way that's a little harder to explain in just talking it out, but once you've done that to your block, to your sloper, and accounted for how it works on your body, that's the great thing about pattern drafting, pattern cutting, is that once that sloper is set for your body, then any pattern that you make, you'll never have to make that adjustment again. You know, any pattern that you make off of your sloper.
Yes, that's the beauty of it. And somebody asked, Marisol asked about adaptive pattern cutting. Yeah, and I think that's just a oval term to describe lots of different issues, which is why Tricia said it sort of depends on different information.
Right.
Because that might be, because we were talking before the show, one of my aunts was born, this is back in the 30s, so I didn't know what it was called, but my grandmother always had to change because she used commercial sewing patterns, but she had to always change it for the back because of the way her muscles built. So that's quite an easy adaptive pattern cutting for a specific need, but some of them might be a bit more complicated, but you know, it is again using sort of pattern cutting knowledge and fitting.
It's using those fitting things that you learn through learning pattern making, pattern cutting, and adapting them to cover a different shape. That's really all it is. It's you know, manipulating it to work the shape.
It's a company. It was you know, the Instagram account.
The Sewn Adaptive.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it in the chat now for you, Marisol.
Yeah. So
is it with an O and E? Might be like that.
Adaptive or
no, the sewn.
Sewn, SEWN. And it's Lynn Wardrobe Sews, or LYN. Lynn Wardrobe Sews, like LYN_Lynn Wardrobe Sews is her handle, and then Alexander the Tailor is Alex's.
Oh, I think I know both of them.
Yeah, they're very lovely. And they just formed this business. They're based out of California.
That's great.
But that's their whole mission, is to help people.
And there are a few fashion designers who do it, but I always think that's quite limiting because
well, it's just like clothing, you know. It's even if you have the same disability, it could show up on different people's bodies in different ways. So I'll just quickly, so we don't lose it, so I can keep up with the chat. Marisol's asking, should blocks for coats and jackets be different than blocks for regular tops? And what's your advice on that? That's a great question. And it kind of goes back to what I was mentioning earlier about kind of depending on what you plan on making with your slopers and your blocks. Absolutely. I mean, I have used my standard blocks to make coats and jackets. it's definitely doable, but you need to account for extra ease, the fact that you're wearing it over other clothing. So there's more ease that needs to be built in. So there is, if you're going to have a jacket block or a coat block, you would want that to be different. It would fit you differently than a standard sloper, like a standard bodice or skirt, just because you want to have more ease built into that. So you can use one for the other, but it would definitely fit differently. And it kind of depends, because I have a couple of cute jackets or coats that are really just, you would wear them as kind of a garment and not wear tons of things underneath them, maybe a camisole or something. And so that would fit differently. But that's a great question. And it really goes back to really any pattern can be a sloper or a block. Like if you love a certain cut of a pair of jeans, if you love the pair of pants that you wear all the time, if you have a favorite t-shirt that you like, you can, and you fit it to you and it fits you well. If you have a tried and true pattern a commercial pattern that you use and you're like, gosh, I just love this pattern and it fits me so well, you can use that as your starting point, as your sloper, as your block. I would pare down on any details, because that's the great thing. And that's the whole point of, and that kind of gets into another question that I always get is, the purpose of a sloper or a block. And I'm saying those two terms because I usually refer to it as a sloper and Charlotte usually refers to it as a block. That's the same thing, just in case you're clear about what a sloper or a block is. That's the same term. So that's why I'm saying both. But the purpose of that is to act as a template to create other designs. And you spend that initial time, and I know Charlotta and I both agree on this, but you spend that like when you first start, you want to learn a little bit about it, about pattern making and pattern cutting and what, is really possible to do with it. But once you get to the point where you are creating your own slopers for yourself or whoever you're making patterns for, you really want to make sure you go through and fit those slopers to your body so that you've made whatever adjustments like talking about or any adjustments that you would need to fit you perfectly. And then that becomes your sloper so that you can take that template, that block, and make other designs. You can change the sleeve. You could make a different detail. You can do like an asymmetrical design. And by using the sloper or using a block, you're going to eliminate a lot of those fit issues if you were to then go and use a commercial pattern in that design. So that's kind of the reason and the purpose of a block or a sloper. So if you're always wanting to make different styles of coats and jackets, then you're going to want to have a coat or jacket sloper so that every time you go to make a coat or a jacket, you're not taking your standard body sloper or block and adding extra ease to account for what is needed for a jacket. So it would just help you kind of jump ahead. And that's the whole point of a sloper or a block, is so you're not figuring it out over and over every single time. It's kind of like a cheater method.
No, I totally agree, but it's like I used to have a coat block, but I don't make a lot of coats. So when I redid all my blocks recently, I've got a fitted block, I've got a super fitted block, and I've got a relaxed block because that's what I make. But if you make coats over time or tailored jackets, then have a block for that. And I've seen quite a lot, for example, coat blocks which already have some coat techniques. Like for example, quite often in coats, your side seam and your sleeve seam don't meet because of all the bulk in wool. So I've seen quite a lot of blocks which already have that included, so your seams are not in the same position. And
that's
again,
an interesting detail I kind of hadn't realized.
Yes,
it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and I guess it's a British tradition, it would be tweed, wouldn't it? So it's like quite a heavy fabric. And there's sort of, again, like with darts, if you make lots of tailored jackets, it might make complete point to have your darts in the right position.
And same with like if you had a tailor who all they made was blazers and slacks, and they would most likely have blazer
blocks. So you can have hundreds of different blocks. Like I'm sure Tricia has like a stretch block and a left block.
Unitard blocks for my acrobats, because it was always some version of unitards or leotards. So I have slopers for those things. If you're a bathing suit designer, you would have probably your standard 1-piece, your standard 2-piece, maybe a trunk for, whatever your versions are that work for your body type that you're serving. You would have those blocks and slopers for that. So,
but that actually brings on to a question as well, Tricia, which you had about, can you use your blocks to make sewing pattern?
Yeah.
Because that sort of isn't the same thing as what is the line between a block and a sewing pattern, and how would they work?
Yeah. So,
sorry, we have a quick follow-up question which says, so darts would be positioned different depending on the type of block. Yeah, so it's sort of what the purpose is. So if you always make little shift dresses where you don't have darts, you would have your darts hidden down here. For tailored blocks, we're normally going down. My fashion block, as I showed earlier, has it like that. Tricia has a different one. So yeah,
it just depends on what your end goal is, or what the majority of what you're making.
So again, it's actually personal. So it's no, it's whatever works for the pattern tailor designer, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And before we get too far, because we have some other questions, and please keep them coming. We love, we're loving this. So if you have more questions or just some feedback on what we're talking about, we do want to hear from you. This is all about you.
Yes.
But we had one more question from Nina that I wanted to answer about protecting patterns legally.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that one. So, so she asked, and it sounds like, and this is the same Nina that was asking about adaptive clothing. So to my knowledge, and I'm not a lawyer, Charlotte's not a lawyer, so we don't know, but to my
don't protest when you take it.
That's not what we can tell you how to make anything out of fabric. But in my experience, what I have always heard, and I mean, this is how knockoffs are a thing, out in the world, is you can't really copyright patterns or legally say, like, I'm the only one who's allowed to make this, because there's just so many patterns that are out there. And I think somewhere along the lines in my world, I heard that all you have to do to make it like okay to copy something is to change it by 20%. But there are companies out there that don't even change it by 20%. You can just change a small detail. It could be change in sizing. So unfortunately, there's no really way to protect. It's not like a book or a piece of art that you can say, this is mine and it's only mine with fashion. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. So you can, though, and we discussed this before we jumped on, we have seen it where pattern companies will say, this is not for resale or company to be used in that way, but it really is kind of, they're hoping you'll be nice and honor their wishes.
Yeah, I basically said, look, I love small Etsy indie sellers. They say, please don't use this commercially. But of course, nice people won't use it commercially. The people who copy, they will use it anyway. And I think the problem is, Tricia said, it's true, it used to be a rule. You had to change quite a lot to copy it. But again, it only works for companies in the same country as you. So one company I actually worked for, they had a very famous, for the UK, bag, and the high street company copied it completely, and they took them to court and they won. But I think it cost us tens of thousands of pounds, took several years of stress, and when you go live a payout, and the other company has done it already, so over. But
it's already sold. People are already, so it's kind of, that's the thing. Is there are laws that will protect it, but if you're just a small company, it's very hard to.
And I think especially I think the sewing community, most people are quite nice and they like to support small pattern labels.
Yeah.
Problem is if Shine, decides to do it.
Well, and I think the bigger thing, that I see a lot on social media, and I've seen from friends, is that they can't take an image of your like they can't steal your image and say, we're selling this thing, and that's not okay, because then that's your likeness and that's your image. So if they take a design and copy it, that's one thing that you can't really, unfortunately, protect. I mean, you can go through and try to copyright things. It is a process, and it's kind of like what Charlotte was saying is, you can go through that process, but the protection is going to be very minimal, and the amount of energy and time and money that you're going to have to spend to enforce that is going to, you have to weigh whether that's
negative energy as well, isn't it? It's sort of one of those things where you're quite powerless. You can just hope that people are nice.
Yeah, I mean, and you can, like, with images of your clothes, like if you made it, it's your fabric, it's your image, and somebody steals that image, that definitely has legal, you can fight back against that. So if you are trying to like take someone's image and post it as your own, that you can get in trouble for. And then the other thing is trademark. So you can't, you'll notice, like when you have a knockoff, if it's like the bag that you mentioned, Charlotta, I'm sure the high street version of it, they couldn't use, like there's always something a little bit off from the logo. It'll look similar, but it's not exactly the same because they changed it that 20%. And then, I mean, technically you could still fight that, and I'm sure that's why they won. But, you know, trademark, when something is trademarked, and I have trademarked my logos before, and it's a...
Yes, you have. I think I was just going to say, I remember you having a trademark.
Yeah, it's a long process, and there are legalities involved, and it's, of course, when you're talking internationally, things might differ a little bit with that too. But like you can't make something, you could make something that looks exactly like something that Nike is producing, but you can't put the Nike logo on it and say it's Nike, because then that's taking their brand, their trademark, and you're selling it as something that it's not. So that's a legality that you can.
Yeah.
So it's just, there's fine lines you have to be careful of.
Yes, because there's patterns. It would be like one of the big pattern cutters copying you or something. But it's quite hard to prove, as Tricia says. So
yeah. I will also say, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and there's an indie pattern company that has done quite well, and it was the owner of this indie pattern company called Ellie and Mac, if you guys have heard of them. And the podcast was it The Social Hour? I think it was The Social Hour. Yeah. And she was talking about, she was happy she started off making like little girls' dresses and then moved into making patterns, and is a pattern maker. She used to be excited that people would take her patterns and sell, like make the garments and sell them as their business. So it really kind of depends. But as far as legalities, that's kind of where the lines are drawn. I think.
It's a tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah. So Laura's asking for some clarification, she said.
So she says, Charlotta, can you explain regarding the code block with regard to the way they draft the sleeve and the tweet? Didn't understand. Thank you. Yes, so all it is, Laura, is on our normal blocks, all our armhole seams and the undersleeve and the side seam meet in the same place. So you got the cross. So the code block I've used up to now is basically where I think the sleeve underarm seams move slightly forward. So maybe about 3 centimeters, about an inch, and that way you don't have that cross where all the fabric meets. And you know, if you're working cotton, it doesn't matter. You want everything to match and meet. But if you're really thick tweed, that sort of forward movement means you don't have all the seam allowance in the same place. So it's a bit like, quite often that's why coats have a 2-piece sleeve.
To put them in a different position.
2-piece sleeve, because better fit, but also you are distributing your seam allowances meeting, so you don't have like 4 meeting at the same point. So that's all it is. So if you've worked lots of bulky fabrics, you can sort of factor it in. It makes it slightly tricky to pattern match everything if you walk your pattern at the end, because you always have to remember, oh yes, I don't match. I'm not supposed to.
And another thing on that, like
put a notch in.
That would be a specific thing. You know, maybe having a 2-part sleeve would be part of your jacket or your coat sloper or template or block. And same with, like, why I say a button-down shirt. Like if your business is to make Western shirts, which I know is kind of an American thing, but but a button-down collared shirt, let's say, you would have a collar, maybe a collar stand, and maybe a placket for what goes into your sleeve, and a cuff, and all those things that if you were working with a standard sloper or a block that didn't have all those details, you would be having to do those details every single time. Whereas if this was something that you made all the time, having a block of that specific pattern, and then you're just changing up maybe design seam lines, or changing the collar, the points of the collar and how big that collar is, or different elements, maybe making a covered button placket, or, changing out the placket, but at least you're starting with the base of that pattern, and you can change those details without having to reinvent and have to figure that out every single time too.
Yeah. So basically there's no rules to how many blocks you can have.
Right.
But having like your favorite color makes complete sense. I've seen that as well on sort of shirt blocks.
Yeah.
But like your perfect lapel collar, what you basically use a lot of the time.
Yeah, and then if you do have your own line, I'm sure you know this from fashion, you're going to have things that are signature to your line a lot of times, the way that you do your welt pockets, or the way that you have your collar that's done, or the way that your cuffs are always done. I know that there's I think it's a British suit company that they always have like a pink buttonhole, or a red. I think it's a red.
Yeah,
something monkey.
Yeah, there's both
monkey.
There's Rotang, one of the several row. They have a different undercollar each season. Yeah.
So that's something that you kind of get into. So by having patterns that are already figured out, you don't have to figure that out every time that you're creating these things. That is a block. That's a sloper. So it's a very broad term. When you start learning pattern making, we're like, you're going to make this block, and then you're going to make, your skirt block, and then you're going to make this block. But really anything can be a block or a sloper. It's having that jumping off.
Yeah, because the difference is just that in a sewing pattern you have a seam allowance on, so it's ready to make. A block is where you then might make changes to it over time, so you have no seam allowance. And it isn't cardboard, so you can use it again and again, and it won't rip. And
on thicker paper, so it makes it. So the point, if you guys are new to pattern cutting and pattern, so notice Charlotta's block is on thicker paper, and so is mine, because what the first step you do with this when you're making a new pattern is you trace it out, and then you go, okay, now I'm working on this piece that I've traced out to cut it up and to change all of the design elements that you want. And you cannot cut this out of fabric and sew it up. First of all, there's nothing. In order for me to sew this together, I would have to take a little bit away of the actual pattern, because there is no seam allowance. So there's typically no seam allowance on your pattern. So that is a good distinction. I'm saying, like, you can take a tried and true pattern, a commercial pattern that you love the way it fits, but in order to turn it into a block or turn it into a sloper, then you would remove any seam allowances or any special details that you might want to change later on that are just distinct to that specific garment.
Yes, totally true. And Tricia, we haven't been here for an hour, but there's technical difficulties.
Yeah.
So shall we finish off by talking quickly about your question you had about whether you can use your block to just copy an existing sewing pattern? So
yes, I did want to touch on that for sure. I would say that one's probably the most common question that I hear. In fact, I just talked about it yesterday during a VIP fitting day that I had with one of my students. So it's a common misconception, as I explained earlier, that, once you start learning a little bit about pattern making and pattern cutting, you want to spend some time making sure this is fit. Obviously, this is not my size, but your sloper or block is fit to your body. And that can be, a longer process to figure that out, because it is new to you, but it's worth it, because then after that, you're going to have that block or that sloper that's going to fit you perfectly. And a lot of students think, okay, I finally have this. Now every pattern that I ever come into contact with, I'll know exactly how to make it fit my body. And I just want to share with you that that's not the purpose of a block or a sloper, to use in that way. Although, and that's why I explained so many times what the purpose of a sloper or a block is, it's to create other patterns. But you can use it. You can use it to compare to other sewing patterns. But I really want to give this caveat that I run into a lot. It's if you want that commercial pattern that you're comparing it to fit exactly like your sloper or your block, then make that design out of your block or your sloper, because that's going to get you there faster than trying to alter this commercial pattern to fit your sloper, because that would be kind of working backwards. It's not really the point of it. But it can be used. It can be beneficial. Charlotta and I both discussed saying the crotch curve. Like if you finally figured out the crotch curve, the rise amount, and all of that on your pants, on your trousers that actually work for your body, you can look at that specific part of the pattern, and you can like lay your pattern down onto that commercial pattern and see, it's going to give you a really quick visual reference. Like, wow, on my sloper or my block, it's bigger in the waist and than this commercial pattern. So that's going to tell you, oh, I need to make this commercial pattern bigger in the waist. Otherwise that's not going to fit. That's going to be a very obvious thing. But in saying that, I do want to also mention, especially like, and that was a good point that Charlotta said, that you don't want all your fitting out of one dart. If I were to lay this, let's say it's my size, this is obviously not my size, but if this was my size and I was laying this onto a commercial pattern that was supposed to be my size as well, and I look at the waist and I go, wow, the waist is, on this commercial pattern isn't as wide as this, but you have to take into consideration, this is not my waist measurement. This is my waist measurement. So you have to think about the style of the pattern that you are comparing it to and where the darts are placed. Because remember, this dart opening is not included in the fit of this pattern. So this is the waist measurement. So make sure when you're comparing it to, so what I'm trying to say is it's a little trickier than just laying it on and now magically you're going to be able to make every pattern that you run into fit. Things are cut differently in a different style. Depending on the design, things will be added in. Maybe there's more ease or less ease for the design of that garment. So there's a lot of things to be taken into consideration. And this is actually a class I'm thinking of developing for my private membership, the pattern place, where we do hold monthly memberships. And I think that this would be a great topic to cover. And so I can share some insight on that.
Yeah, because when Tricia asked me, I said, I don't really have ever done commercial patterns, but I use it because we used to do a lot of what people now call cloning. But quite often when you work for fashion companies, you use vintage garments or existing garments. And now I do it if I have a garment I love. And what I do is I measure the garment. And then I compare it to my blocks and say, oh, this is a little bit wider in the shoulder, so I need to make my shoulder wider. But then you can copy it. Because the problem is, even if you, for example, lay on your crotch curve and it's shorter or longer, it doesn't mean you can just add that on, because that's going to change the balance of the whole garment. So it's just saying, okay, if I wanted to have trousers, I might just, it has a slightly dropped crotch or something. So it's not that straightforward, because sewing patterns already have all the designing, and it's quite hard to retro work out what actually has happened to achieve that fit.
It can be a helpful tool to look, but it's a giving you a kind of a broad overview of things you might want to look out for when you do your first wall or your first mock-up. It's not going to be that you are going to make this commercial pattern be exactly the same as your block or your sloper, because that isn't really how they work.
And it tells you more about how you want that fit, basically, how that pattern fits, whether it's skin tight or slightly loose, isn't it? And you've got one little final question from Marisol, which is about how would you entirely remove that dart from that block? I'm assuming she's talking about our basic block. Mm-hmm. And she tried a method and it didn't work out. So shall I answer it? Because I have a tutorial about it. Oh, and she just followed up saying, I removed the waist dart by measuring it and talking with amount from the side. So the basic rule is the waist dart you can ignore, because that just makes your garment tighter around the waist. So if you ignore it, your garment will just fall straighter. However, you can never ignore the bust dart, because we can't, that bust is always there. So we have to have a shaping. And the way to remove it is basically make your bodice block more relaxed. And I do have a YouTube tutorial for that, which people really like. I hope this wasn't the one you tried and didn't work out for you. I put it in the comments now. Do you agree with me, Tricia?
Yeah, I mean, that's The thing is, and I had a student actually in the pattern place do this as well, or wondering about this as well. The thing is, we have to understand, and that's kind of, I think Charlotte is similar in how she teaches as well. It depends on the fit that you want to achieve. The more darts, the more seams that you have, the tighter that you can make the garment to your body, that it will actually fit the form of your shape. If you want to start eliminating those darts, then you really are asking for it to be more of a looser garment, because the only way to contour, to cup, because the whole point of a dart is to cup, right? Like, it's so funny when I have students learning how to fold and get the dart root, they want it to be flat, and you can't fold the dart and have it be flat, because then that's negating the whole point of a dart. So the whole point of a dart is to cup, is to take a 2D flat shape and turn it into something that will hug a 3D shape. So if you are eliminating darts, you have to forego the fit that you're looking for. Otherwise, it's not going to work, because you can't have something unless it's stretch. Now, if it's stretch, the amount that the fabric stretches is taking the place of the dart shaping, which is why in a lot of knit garments you can get away without having as many seams, or get away without having darts. So it's kind of, you can't have both. You need to kind of choose one or the other, what you're trying to achieve.
Yes, and Marisol actually said she wanted to remove it to create a loose flowy top. Yeah, in that case, if it just had a waist dart, you can literally just ignore that.
Just ignore it.
It's optional. And the bust dart, you have to sort of refigure your block again slightly. And that's my relaxed block, which I love, because that's just slightly, it's not boxy, but it just skims your body and doesn't have as much fitting.
Yeah, so and that's the thing. So if you want something loose, and the way I like to think about it is, the darts are always there. Whether you use them or not is kind of up to you and the design that you're achieving. So like she has waist darts in this top, or a bust dart in this top, but she's not sewing them closed. So those waist darts then become ease of the garment. And that's how I like to think about it.
Yes. So basically, this is my relaxed block. So you can see it hasn't got a bust dart, but I could make it slightly, I could still put the waist darts in, and it would just be skimming but not fitted. So as soon as you put the bust darts away, you gain the ease, as Tricia said. So yeah, there's a compromise. Well, not a compromise, it's a design decision. Do you want
it's a design
fitting or ease?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I saw your light going away. At least we can see you. Well, I know we had a rough start. I hope that most of you guys found it over to us.
Yes.
Able to answer.
Or we will link to it in our Instagram stories as well, so you can rewatch the rerun. And next month you're on Tricia's channel, hopefully without any technical problems. So you'll find us there. I don't think we got a topic yet, so we will talk about that.
Right. We haven't. So yeah, and also, we want to talk about stuff that you guys are interested in. So if there's ever a topic that you're curious about, or you're just, like last month we did, how did both Charlotta and I get started into teaching and into pattern cutting, because people were curious about that. So if there's ever anything that you're wondering about, that you would like to hear us talk about, we just love these chats because they're fun for us, talking about our favorite subjects. But if there's ever, anything that you're curious about hearing, we're open to feedback.
People left the fabric one recently, so maybe we should do something more like about all the stuff around pattern cutting, where to get the best tips, stuff like that.
Yeah, we can talk about tools. We can talk about books and resources. We can talk about, your kitty, he's so cute.
Yeah. He's 20, he's not a cat, kitty.
20?
Yes, and he's becoming
wow. Mine are 18.
Okay, so yes.
Oh man, yeah. Yes. And one of mine looks like him. So
yeah, he's half Persian. So you got a proper cat talk. You got a proper Maine Coon, haven't you?
He's not. I mean, it's funny because I thought maybe he was, but he's not that exotic. You know, I asked the vet, and they're like, "Yeah, he's a domestic medium hair," was what they cut. And I'm like, "Really? That's it? That's all he is?"
You can just
And then I have a tortoiseshell. My girl is a tortoiseshell, so she's kind of all different colors, and they're a little sassy, especially in her old age. She's like, I don't even care anymore. How to properly measure of the body? That's a good topic.
Maybe that's a really that could be a whole topic.
So like measuring and how it compares to. So we'll chat about it, but we also we're both active on YouTube, obviously, but we both are also active on Instagram, and I know that a lot of our friends see us there as well. So that's another great place to interact with us and chat with us if you ever come up with some ideas. We love chatting over there.
Yes, and I will put all the links into our description now for both of us. But thank you so much for watching, and do please give us a like and subscribe so you get notified next time we have issues. And that's it from us for tonight. Thank you so much for watching, and lovely to chatting to you.
Yes,
as always, Tricia.
Yes, thank you. I love it.
Amara says, how can I know about these types of video chats in advance? If you subscribe to our channels, you get like a
it lets you know.
Yeah.
And then also, if both Charlotta and I have email, newsletter lists, and we've been trying to be. I actually forgotten how to do mine last minute today, but we usually send out. I know I send mine out 30 minutes before, and Charlotta does
10 minutes. You get lots of notifications
with the link. I mean, but that's only good if the link actually works, and we don't have to jump. But if you're subscribed to our channels, it will. I think it alerts you right when we go live.
Yeah, you just have to turn on the alerts because. Turn it off because
so I know that Charlotta and I both try to give our newsletter lists a heads up. Kind of, I sent one out on Monday and let people know, and also we talk about it on our Instagram as well. And I know Charlotta's a little better about notifying it earlier on YouTube. Working on getting better about that.
Anyway, thank you so much for watching, everybody.
Thank you guys.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.